a powerful tale of racial injustice and poetic redemption, set in a modern American corporate world, where deep-seated prejudice meets a stunning reversal of fate. The story of a black janitor belittled for her skin, but destined to own the very empire that once rejected her. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. In the pristine lobby of a Fortune 500 company, a moment of cruel humiliation ignites a storm that no one sees coming. The sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hawthorne and Mills Enterprises, painting the lobby in golden streaks of light. Everything sparkled: the white marble floors, the glass paneling, the sleek chrome reception desk. Every corner of the building screamed precision, wealth, and legacy. From the outside, it was the epitome of American corporate success, but beneath that glassy surface lay something darker, a quiet current of exclusion, a culture that celebrated whiteness while tolerating others only when necessary. Clarice Monroe moved silently across the polished lobby floor, her gloved hands gripping the handle of her janitorial cart. The mop bucket sloshed slightly as she steered it toward the elevators. She wore the standard navy blue uniform, the logo of the company embroidered neatly over her chest. Her braided hair was tied back beneath a faded cap, and her dark brown eyes watched everything, recording more than anyone suspected. She'd learned to be invisible in places like this. It was a skill she had mastered, not out of shame but survival. When you're a black woman in a white man's tower, silence often kept the storms at bay, or so she had thought. Douglas Hawthorne strode into the lobby, flanked by two junior executives laughing too loudly at something he'd said. He cut a sharp figure in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair combed to perfection, his steps arrogant and assured. His gaze slid across the lobby until it stopped on Clarice. For a moment, the room tightened. Clarice, kneeling to wipe up a spilled drop of coffee near the elevator, looked up instinctively. Their eyes met her steady, his narrowing. "Still mopping floors, huh?" he said loudly, stopping in front of her. The laughter from the junior executives faltered. Clarice didn't respond. She didn't look away either. Douglas frowned. "You missed a spot." He tilted the half-full coffee cup in his hand, and with a flick of his wrist, let the remaining liquid arc downward. The brown splash hit her uniform, and the floor, hot, sticky, deliberate. A gasp rippled through the lobby. One of the receptionists glanced away, pretending to be busy. A security guard standing by the door shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The two executives looked stunned, their smirks frozen mid-smile. Clarice stood up slowly. Her uniform was stained, coffee dripping from her gloved hand. Her voice when she spoke was calm. "That wasn't necessary." Douglas smirked. "You're here to clean, aren't you?" She stared at him, not in fear, but with the kind of gaze that dissected a man's soul. It was brief, silent, and powerful. She bent down, grabbed the soiled rag, and began mopping without another word. It wasn't submission. It was calculation. The humiliation simmered in the air long after she'd left the lobby. No one followed. No one apologized. HR would later claim they hadn't seen the footage clearly enough. They'd urge her not to escalate, to move on, and they'd offer her a new set of uniforms, as if that somehow addressed the violence of the moment. Clarice didn't cry. She returned to the staff locker room, removed the uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it into her locker. She washed the coffee from her hands and face with methodical care, staring into the small mirror above the sink. Her reflection didn't blink. Her shift ended, but she didn't leave the building. Not yet. Instead, she took the stairs, 12 floors up, to a quiet maintenance corridor no one ever used. Inside, behind an unmarked door, was a small unused office filled with forgotten supply records, a place she had quietly claimed as her own. She unlocked the drawer and pulled out a sleek black leather bag. From it, she retrieved her phone, a tablet, and a thin binder. Inside were files, charts, ownership percentages, strategic notes. Because Clarice Monroe wasn't just a janitor. She hadn't come to Hawthorne and Mills out of desperation or lack of ambition. She had come with a plan. Years ago, after her father was fired without cause from a white-run manufacturing plant, she'd sworn she would dismantle such systems from the inside. She had the degrees, the intelligence, and more importantly, the patience. She'd been working, quietly, under the radar, building something far more powerful than anyone suspected. And Douglas Hawthorne had just made his biggest mistake. The coffee incident wasn't the beginning of her humiliation. It was the final entry in a long record of subtle aggressions, dismissals, and covert racism that had stalked her since she was a girl. That moment in the lobby was not a defeat, it was a spark. Outside, the building gleamed in the sun. Inside, the empire Douglas believed he controlled had already begun to shift. Clarice logged into her encrypted investment dashboard, eyes scanning recent transactions. Her holdings were growing, steadily and strategically. Names she controlled, businesses she quietly owned stakes in, funds she influenced, all were converging toward a singular purpose. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. And no one saw it coming. Unbeknownst to Douglas, Clarice had just authorized the final wire transfer. By the time the next board meeting occurred, she would be the company's largest shareholder. Behind every overlooked face is a storm of stories, strength, and secrets. The janitor's closet was dim, silent except for the low hum of the building's central heating system. The scent of disinfectant clung to the walls like residue of every silent indignity suffered within them. Clarice Monroe sat on a folding chair near the back, her posture relaxed, but her mind razor-sharp. Her uniform hung on a hook behind her, and the glow of her tablet reflected in her dark eyes. Her fingers scrolled swiftly, stopping only when she reached the live ticker of Hawthorne & Mills' stock movement. She'd been tracking the company's performance daily, not just as an employee, but as a strategist, a hunter waiting for the moment to strike. This wasn't a dream she stumbled into. It was a war she had trained for all her life. Years before Clarice mopped floors at Hawthorne & Mills, she walked the polished stone hallways of Stanford University. In a sea of ambition, she'd been a beacon, top of her class in business strategy and artificial intelligence. A double major no one believed she could finish, not because she wasn't smart, but because she was a black girl with braids who didn't shrink herself to make others feel comfortable. Professors praised her intellect, but ignored her raised hands. Classmates copied her research models but excluded her from study groups. Still, she thrived, not in defiance, but in purpose. Back then, she'd carried her father's factory ID badge in her wallet. It was old, creased, and laminated badly, but to her it was sacred. He had worked 32 years at the Arcadia foundry, never late, never insubordinate. One day, a new supervisor, younger and white, accused him of sleeping on the job. There was no investigation, no second chances. Security escorted him out without even letting him pack up his things. Clarice was 16 when it happened. She remembered her father's silence more than anything. The way he sat in the kitchen, shoulders slumped, tie still on, hands trembling around a cold coffee cup. He'd built that factory's reputation with sweat and loyalty. But none of it mattered. One white accusation, and 3 decades disappeared. That night, Clarice whispered to herself, "I'll own what they said I could never touch." It wasn't just a vow. It became her design for life. Years later, after Stanford and a stint at a global consultancy where she crafted billion-dollar acquisition strategies for executives who never looked like her, Clarice started forming a plan. She knew what she was up against. Power protected itself. It hid behind networks, legacy, and bloodlines. She couldn't kick the door down. But she could walk in quietly. She chose Hawthorne & Mills not for the salary or the position. It was the target. A company old enough to carry generational wealth but arrogant enough to ignore a black janitor in their hallway. It was perfect. So she submitted a resume without a college listed, claimed her previous work history had been destroyed in a fire. The hiring manager, a white woman with a clipboard smile, barely looked up before nodding. "We'll put you on night rotation to start," she said. They never bothered to Google her. Clarice worked every shift with calculated observation. Her cart became a cover. She listened to elevator conversations between executives, read memos left unattended on print stations, noticed which clients were prioritized, and which departments were drained of resources despite outperforming. She paid attention to lunch orders, the parking lot arrangement, even the corporate art choices. Every detail was data. At night, she analyzed it all. Patterns of budget allocations, quarterly churn rates, internal weaknesses in supply chain vendors. She began mapping the company's vulnerabilities and blind spots, designing a blueprint for future takeover. Clarice wasn't looking to survive. She was aiming to conquer. She learned Douglas Hawthorne's schedule down to the minute, his preference for single-origin Guatemalan coffee, his disdain for female executives, his history of demoting every black employee who ever dared question him. He ran the company like an empire carved from ego and inheritance. Clarice's plan grew sharper with each microaggression, each overlooked opportunity, each time she was told to clean something that wasn't dirty. One evening, while emptying trash bins near the financial planning office, she overheard a mid-level manager talking about the board's discomfort with new tech competition. "We're slow to evolve," he muttered, "and Doug thinks AI is some liberal fantasy. He doesn't even know we've been losing contracts." Clarice smiled behind her mask. That was the crack she needed. Soon after, she created a new LLC under the name Rosewood Equity Partners. It sounded clean, white, and safe. Using funds she'd quietly grown through cryptocurrency investments, AI patents, and early startup exits, she started acquiring small stock positions in Hawthorne and Mills, each one traced back to different firms she controlled. Quiet, discreet, legal. The janitor wasn't just watching anymore. She was buying. Her daily walks through the company now held a deeper rhythm. Every hallway passed was one step closer. Every time someone ignored her, they unknowingly fed the silence she wielded like a blade. Then it happened. She was reviewing her stock app late at night when she noticed a new buyer entering the field. Someone else had begun acquiring shares, also quietly, also through third-party proxies. The name was encrypted behind shell firms. The purchases were small, unnoticeable to most, but clearly intentional. It wasn't her. Clarice's fingers hovered over her screen. A frown formed. Was someone else trying to take the company too? For the first time, Clarice felt her carefully structured advantage ripple. The next morning, Clarice received a cryptic message in her encrypted email. "You're not the only one watching. Let's talk." A friend. Racism doesn't always scream. It whispers in boardrooms and smiles at luncheons. The corner office looked out over the city, glass walls shimmering with midday light. It reflected the stature of its occupant, Douglas Hawthorne, fourth-generation CEO of Hawthorne and Mills. Born into legacy, he had never known want. A childhood of private schools, summer estates, Ivy League networking dinners. His grandfather founded the company. His father expanded it internationally. Douglas inherited the throne effortlessly and ruled it with thinly veiled superiority. He sat behind a mahogany desk, scanning quarterly earnings reports. He tapped his fingers, satisfied with slight profit increases. He didn't consider innovation essential. Tradition was enough. His voice crackled during board meetings, confident and dismissive. "We diversify when the market demands it," he often said. "But culture? That's not a guarantee." It wasn't a threat, it was a doctrine. Yet in his polished halls, racism existed in soft sighs and unspoken directions, not overt slurs. Junior executives knew better than to question. Black employees felt the silence before the exclusion. They heard it in boardroom remarks. "We need someone who fits the image." In leadership retreats, amidst cursory applause for diversity statistics, the sentiment lingered. They're temporary. Douglas's own moments of bigotry emerged like unexpected cracks. An offhand comment at a luncheon. "She's articulate for a black candidate," he'd muttered, barely masking condescension. Or when he paused to praise a white colleague's quick thinking, overlooking the fact the idea had come from someone else entirely. He wasn't a monster, just a man raised in privilege, conditioned never to see more. Clarice had heard rumors while serving coffee at executive retreats. Men made jokes about needing color coordination on panels. Women whispered stories of how black colleagues were promised mentorship programs, then denied budget. The company created diversity committees, but never followed through. Meetings ended, and nothing changed. The committees gathered dust. One afternoon, Clarice paused by the engineering division's open plan area. A small group worked quietly on a new AI platform, cutting-edge and expensive. They were mostly white, except for Rashad Thompson, a senior black engineer who led a crucial subsystem. Weeks ago, he was touted as a rising star. Now, he'd been removed from client presentations without explanation. His budget had shrunk. His name dropped off memos. He was still there on paper, but his influence was gone. Clarice noticed Rashad's tired eyes, the way he lingered by his desk, shoulder slumped. She recognized the pattern. She'd seen it with her own classmates, a cycle of potential met with subtle dismantling. Several black employees hadn't been as discreet. She remembered hearing about Marta Jenkins, a vivacious project manager who challenged Douglas in a feedback session. Words like tone-deaf and unprepared followed her. She left soon after, promoted at another firm. No one mentioned her departure in strategy meetings. There was also Jalen Moore, a mid-level analyst who'd once taken part in a pilot AI initiative. His success was quietly praised, but when it was time to scale, his team was disbanded. The project launched without him, under a white lead. Jalen had walked the halls for a week before handing in his resignation. Clarice kept these stories close. They weren't rumors, they were evidence of a pattern. Evidence she cataloged meticulously. One day, she overheard Douglas speaking with a senior partner. "Have we cleared the senior roles yet? I want leadership that reflects who we are." The partner paused, uncomfortable. "She's pushing hard. I'm not sure she checks all our boxes." "Exactly. We'll manage it," Douglas replied. "Representation is great for press releases, but when it's time to deliver, I need capable hands." That conversation whispered of unspoken quotas, tools of image, then sidelined. She'd heard it before, she'd felt it before, each incident fueling her resolve. Douglas's subtle racism extended beyond the executive floor. At company luncheons, certain employees were seated prominently, while others were backbenchers. The unwritten seating chart mirrored the glass ceiling. The cultural awards, half-heartedly touted, often went to token speakers instead of people doing true impactful work. Once, during a midsummer barbecue on the terrace, a manager offhandedly asked a black intern if she felt safe walking home. The air shifted. The intern managed a smile, but Clarice saw her later by the elevators, dabbing tears. The manager returned to his plate, oblivious. From the outside, Hawthorne and Mills appeared inclusive. Glass doors, chrome accents, a rotating wall listing employee resource groups. But beneath, structural racism thrived in policy silence. Documents revealed a hiring practice that funneled black candidates into support roles. Performance evaluations underwatered minority achievements. Internal referrals circulated within closed networks, mostly white. The architecture of exclusion was subtle and deeply built. Clarice uncovered internal memos where hiring committees were nudged to defer black candidates. She read transcripts from exit interviews, arguments presented as lack of fit. She witnessed email chains suggesting low-key get-togethers with only certain HR reps. Each detail painted a picture bigger than prejudice. It was policy. She thought of her father's firing again. 32 years. Gone with one accusation. Not unlike Rashad. Unlike Marta. Each story a domino in a silent chain. Each one symbolic glass shards of systemic inequality. But while Douglas sat secure, whistling a tune of corporate harmony, Clarice was building an alternate architecture, one founded on equity. His words echoed in her memory. Representation is great for press. It was thin mockery of the promise of change. She was going to crush that facade. Unexpectedly, one afternoon, as Clarice silently cleaned the boardroom after a treasure policy meeting, Douglas marched in alone. His suit jacket hung over his arm, tie loosened, face reddened. He startled her. "I'm looking for Rashad Thompson," he said without greeting. Clarice paused. "I'm not sure he's in today," she answered calmly. "Does anyone know where he is?" he asked, but his voice wasn't concerned, more irritated, as if a piece of property had gone missing. Clarice swallowed. "He left early yesterday." He frowned. "Do you know why?" He studied her. Only for a moment. "No, sir." Douglas closed his eyes briefly, then walked out without another word. The moment sent a ripple through Clarice's mind. He was searching for Rashad. The next morning, the lobby was quiet. The fragrance of fresh lilies masked the janitor's efforts. But when the first executive pages hit their inboxes, shock spread like wildfire. Rashad Thompson had filed a formal but confidential complaint against Douglas Hawthorne, citing systemic discrimination, hostile work environment, and intent to hinder his role. The document quoted specific emails, meetings, and performance manipulations. The HR team scrambled. They'd promised to investigate, but as they convened in hushed tones, one whispered, "Rashad's gone. He left last night. No forwarding address, no farewell email." Clarice watched from the stairwell, mop in hand. She felt no triumph, only a hollow echo of her father's story. Rashad's disappearance carried the same weight. Systemic racism wasn't always about loud chaos. It thrived in vanishing voices. She knew this would escalate. It would expose roots of arrogance, whisper networks, institutional protectionism, silences that spun power. But her question remained. Who would break first? The system, or Douglas? Late that night, as security cameras in a deserted office flickered on remote monitors, a single email notification pinged on Clarice's tablet. It was from an unknown sender. "Do you want to see what they did to Rashad? Check your inbox." Subject, evidence.zip. Power often changes hands long before anyone notices. The corporate world rarely paid attention to a woman in a janitor's uniform. But Clarice Monroe, in the quiet rhythm of her mop and cart, was charting a course to control the very foundations of Hawthorne and Mills. The sterile hallways of the building had become her strategic headquarters. Every overheard conversation, every discarded memo, a stepping stone toward ownership. It began 6 months earlier, under a name no one connected to the cleaning crew, CM Rosewood. A shell identity created to hide her true ambition. Behind it stood her years of savings, financial returns from AI patents, and anonymous investments through minority venture capital funds she had meticulously built. Through Rosewood, she had quietly started acquiring shares in her employer, one small tranche at a time, strategic purchases made during stock dips caused by quarterly layoffs or market turbulence. Each transaction was perfectly timed. She remembered the late-night data dump, the podcast host speculating about technological stagnation at Hawthorne and Mills. "They're safe from change," they said. The next morning she bought more stock, no questions asked. When the company issued severance notices in East Coast offices, she was ready to pounce on the dip. When a scandal broke involving a faulty wearable product, she took another position. She invested not because she wanted power, but because she wanted control. In the cafeteria, she often sat alone at a corner table. Her yellow name tag, Clarice Monroe, reminded her this was only performance art. It let her slip beneath notice. Executives talked above her, competing over who'd buy the latest architecture firm or which consultant to hire. Their chatter about synergy, restructuring, and quarterly forecasts was music to her ears. Behind tinted windows in executive cars, phone calls discussed upcoming boardroom battles. Clarice noted not just what they said, but how they said it. Anger punctuated words. Fear trembled beneath boasts. She cataloged it all, memos stored on her encrypted tablet. It was data she would later use, not to expose, but to enable. Her moves drew no suspicion. Rosewood held shares through innocuous shell entities located across various financial jurisdictions. The trades came in small increments, never enough for flash alerts. The trading desk at Hawthorne and Mills reported nothing. PR teams continued to market corporate strength, unaware that their real foundation was slipping. Clarice knew she was close when financial briefings began to mention a mystery investor, slowly accumulating influence. Douglas Hawthorne had all but dismissed the notion. Probably a hedge fund or family trust, he'd said, peering over his reading glasses in the executive lounge. Not someone with control. If Douglas had checked further, he would have found that CM Rosewood was not only a shareholder but a significant one who controlled more shares than several board members combined. He wouldn't have dug deeper, though. Privilege allowed him ignorance. Control was already slipping from his grip. An unexpected twist came when a recruiter approached Clarice in the cafeteria. Not about janitorial work. He misread her ID badge and offered a non-existent opening in corporate communications, thinking she was a disguised executive. The recruiter left with an apology, but the incident jolted her resolve. It meant her alias was working. She could be anywhere within the company's power structure, and still remain invisible. Clarice leaned into the power of invisibility. She positioned her mop and cart outside the offices of retreat planning and supply chain strategy. She learned the company intended to acquire a small biotech startup. She even heard the CFO mention plans to cut employee stock options in the event of failure. It mattered not only for profits, it affected her own position as a shareholder. One evening, after everyone had left, she lingered in the marketing director's office. A draft presentation was open on the laptop. The new AI rollout was meant to be positioned as inclusive, but internal emails revealed the cost estimates were inflated to silence investor concerns. It was a bluff. Her own savvy evaluation told her it would fail, setting off another opportunity. She left the office quietly and uploaded the file to her secure server. Future leverage material, just in case. She started receiving vague notifications in her encrypted mail. Phishing attempts from unknown sources, trying to get her to click. She ignored them at first, but their persistence meant someone noticed. Someone was watching her watch. Each morning after, she felt eyes on her uniformed back. Once a security guard stopped her in the southeast stairwell. "Evening, Clarice," he said, voice low. Clarice nodded, steady. "You okay?" "Fine," she answered. He hesitated. "Just checking." She smiled politely, but inside she bristled. Someone was tipped off. It should have stopped her, but instead it made her move faster. As the company's next earnings call approached, the stock was already wavering. That dip, Clarice's next chance. She bought again. The control percentage tipped closer to 8%, 10%, then 12%, levels that would demand disclosure. She checked her notifications. No public filings mentioned Rosewood's purchases. Her broker confirmed it. Still within safe threshold. Perfect. Board dynamics grudgingly shifted. Directors whispered about buying more shares to retain majority. Douglas, oblivious, focused on earning projections, not shareholders. He joked to a friend during a lunch that the board could buy the company and still own nothing of value. The irony hung thick in the air. On the eve of the earnings call, Clarice sat in her hidden office with the binder in front of her. This binder contained proof. Internal emails about overinflated figures, discriminatory hiring memos, misdirection in AI investments, and financial models designed to fail. She had graphics, timelines, names. It was her ammunition. In the lobby, she dumped her mop bucket, hung her uniform, and stepped into a passenger elevator alone. The elevator doors closed, and she pressed the floor for the boardroom level. Moments later, she walked out into the boardroom. Room cleared of hallway echoes. Light from a wall of windows accented her silhouette. No one recognized her as the janitor. Rosewood's regular buy-ins were still unknown, but her presence there was powerful. On the table lay the earnings report, share price tickers soon to be announced. On the podium, a microphone awaited Douglas and whoever else had their moment in the spotlight. She placed her binder on a side table, next to a modest paper cup filled halfway with coffee. The caffeine and aroma were intentional, a mirror of the morning she was spat on, her reclamation ritual. It was ironic, elegant, personal. The board would come soon. They still thought this was routine. She'd planted the final seed. As Douglas stepped up to the podium, he cleared his throat and glanced around. "I'd like to invite our largest shareholder to say a few words." Silence. The elevator's ding echoed faintly. Clarice stepped forward. Rosewood's stake had crossed 15%, and no one suspected a thing. Every ceiling shattered leaves behind a storm of broken glass. Clarice leaned against the conference room wall, the echoes of boardroom murmurs drifting through the closed door. Douglas Hawthorne and the board were moments away from discovering the identity of their new largest shareholder. She flexed her fingers around the binder, her lifeblood of proof, and prepared for what was next. But before she faced them, she recalled the journey here, a journey forged in pain, betrayal, and purpose. In her first consulting job at Norton & Pierce, Clarice wore suits that fit her ambition, not her body. She stepped into polished offices each morning, ready to prove herself, and hit a wall. In interviews, managers praised her analytics and AI insights until they saw her. Their eyes softened, smiles dimmed. Questions shifted from technical depth to culture fit. Her astute proposals ceased to draw interest. She remembered one stark moment. A partner asked about her extracurriculars, paused when she replied, "AI ethics board." "That's intense," he said, tallying pros and cons against artificial metrics Clarice sensed were racially coded. She left that interview room feeling like a candidate on trial, not for her qualifications but for her identity. She would later learn the role was filled by a white male peer who came in later. It wasn't overt, just a whisper, but whispers build walls. In her sophomore year at Stanford, Clarice had found mentors, professors who saw her brilliance, encouraged her voice. She was drawn especially to Dr. Ellen Ramirez, an expert in AI fairness. Ramirez praised Clarice's research on algorithmic bias. She invited her to co-author papers, but when Clarice entered the real world of business, those mentors faded. At Norton & Pierce, Ramirez was replaced. At her next job, an AI startup trying to improve healthcare allocation, her primary advocate left within 6 months. The company began valuing fit over impact. Her project stuttered. Invitations to pitch ideas became glossed over remarks in meetings. She was told repeatedly, "Maybe our culture isn't ready for you." Each departure, each closed door, chipped away at her trust, but not her resolve. She used the power of disappointment as fuel, polishing ideas, refining pitches, studying power structures, and learning where influence lived. Back in that dim janitor's office at Hawthorne and Mills, she remembered sitting on the floor with her laptop in her lap, late at night after shifts. She combed through data on board representation, internal promotions, and project leadership demographics. She cross-checked by race, gender, education background, even hometown. She built pivot tables and spreadsheets until she uncovered the heart of the hidden architecture. People of color were 2 times more likely to be kicked off projects halfway, 4 times less likely to get leadership roles, and 5 times more likely to leave within 2 years, not due to performance but isolation. Clarice plotted each data point like chess moves. Every colleague who dismissed her, every subtle insult a toxic colleague at Norton who joked, "She probably just looks good on paper," went into memory files she named glass ceiling cases. They became structured case studies she'd later reference in boardroom narratives. Her stakes in Hawthorne and Mills were more than financial. They were moral. She wasn't just targeting power. She was targeting systems. It was late afternoon when she entered the executive lounge, dark woods and leather chairs with her cart disguised as a minor inconvenience. She paused near the table where humans met for minor alliance building, coffee spoons, half-eaten croissants, overeager interns vying for favor. One figure she'd seen before quietly motioned her over, Marissa Yates, a quiet black senior operations manager. She'd been one of the ones Clarice noticed, overqualified, underutilized. Today, Marissa sat alone, cheeks flushed, staring at an email on her phone. Clarice steeled herself, stopped, and spoke softly. "You okay?" Marissa looked surprised. No one asked. I got passed up again, for the 3rd time. Clarice knelt by the table. "They didn't deserve you anyway." Marissa's lips quivered. "Sometimes I wonder if I imagined all the praise early in my career." Clarice shook her head. "You didn't imagine it. They erased you." She pressed a folded note into Marissa's hand. "Read it tonight. Don't trash it." That night, Marissa read Clarice's data briefing. Promotion rates, promotion bias index, and detailed charts comparing her career trajectory with her white peers. With it came Clarice's stanza, "You're not alone. You deserve more, and soon someone will believe in you." The next morning, Marissa returned with a faint hope in her eyes. She hadn't resigned. Instead, she approached HR, quietly, strategically, requesting a formal re-review. The power of Clarice's precision became clearer. She wasn't just fighting racism, she was giving survival tools. With every shift, Clarice moved closer to the center of things. She followed board meeting schedules. She noticed Douglas left early on Fridays for golf. She heard whispered meetings about layoffs disguised as efficiency reviews. She suspected an acquisition plan in motion, and she sensed that momentum was shifting, but not fast enough. Her binder grew thicker: memos, emails, market reports, summarized patterns of bias. She was compiling the evidence of institutional racism. When she leaked a portion anonymously to a journalist friend, as source provided internal data, she watched from afar as a small article appeared. Anonymous, cautious, but hinting at deeper rot. Media interest wasn't explosive, but it caught some board members' attention. Internal tensions rose. PR scrambles began. HR pivoted to defensive language. No evidence of systemic bias. Marissa's re-review stalled. Rumors spread, but Clarice, silent, persistent, stayed in motion. Just as Clarice sensed the board's momentary distraction might delay her plans, a twist emerged. Amidst her financial maneuverings, a rival investor began making covert moves. It wasn't just a passive takeover. A competitor hedge fund had surfaced on the shareholder activity boards. Strange proxy filings suggested insider backing, not hostile, but silent and consequential. Clarice's inside information gave her chills. Someone else was trying to shape Hawthorne and Mills. If they succeeded in becoming a controlling stake before her, her mission, her moral mission, would be compromised. The board could shift to that hedge fund. The culture she wanted to dismantle might survive behind new faces. She tapped into her cocktail of strategy and ethics. It was time to accelerate. That night, Clarice scrubbed floors faster than usual. The mop soaked up spilled coffee from an executive's rushed switch. She moved between floors, selling her facade of the humble janitor, while holding a mind schemed for seismic shift. In the empty lobby, she dialed Marissa on a secure line. "We need to talk before tomorrow. I can't do it without you." Marissa answered, voice low and tense. "I'm with you." Clarice revealed she'd need Marissa to collect insider stories, names of employees hurt by policy, documents showing email patterns, connections between HR decisions and their race or gender. If Clarice was going to make her case, she'd need witnesses and corroboration, and she'd already bought shares. Marissa paused. "I'll do it." They hung up. Silence hummed in the lobby. Clarice stared at the reflection in the glass. Her uniform was stained from a long shift, but her eyes burned with clarity. She whispered her vow again. "I'll own what they said I could never touch." The next morning, tremors rippled through executive offices. Emails flagged urgent all-hands board meeting tonight. No agenda given. The stock market sniffed it. Small tremors shifted prices. The board was nervous. The rival hedge fund was active. And Clarice, armed with evidence, shares, and allies, saw the moment to push forward. But just as urgency rose, another wave hit. Whispers that Douglas had called in family lawyers. His father, long retired, had returned to take control if necessary. It meant the final showdown would not be just financial, it would be legendary. Clarice cleaned a corner of the boardroom with calm precision. She felt the gravity of what the evening would bring. The boardroom lights glinted off the long table. The binder lay next to her paste jar of coffee. In that moment, everything converged. Her past scars, her stolen mentors, her strategic patience, her snap vow. She pressed her palm against the binder. The glass ceiling had splintered. However, steel resolve would determine if she could shatter the entire structure. Just as she slipped from the boardroom, phone in hand, she saw the flashing notification from her broker app. Emergency board vote scheduled. Proxy needed within the next 30 minutes. Vote yes to appoint interim leadership. Reply now. The higher the tower, the louder the crash. A single email had flipped the day's script. Emergency board meeting at 6 p.m. Mandatory attendance. In the lobby, afternoon light sharpened the chrome and glass edges. Executives who usually strode with confidence now hesitated. A door slammed. Phones buzzed. The higher the tower, the louder the crash. Clarice sat alone at a corner bench, her reflection ghosted in the polished marble floor. She wore a charcoal gray suit, slim, professional, unassuming. Her mop and cart were hidden in the supply closet. She had waited for this moment her entire life. Now standing at the precipice, every heartbeat marched with tension. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick. 25 faces ranged from concern to rage. board members, Douglas's family lawyers, legal counsel, and a trembling HR head. Glassy-eyed executives traded whispers. Douglas stood at the head of the table, hands clenched. His face drained color. "This," he began, shaking slightly. "This scandal has cost us 10% of market value in one day." He slapped a printed dossier on the table. "We're blindsided by internal negligence." He cast a look at the legal team. "We need leadership. Interim, someone who can steady the company." A murmur, a chair scraped. The head lawyer cleared his throat. "Sir, under bylaws, a shareholder vote is required to appoint interim leadership in case of board incapacity." Douglas inhaled sharply. "Then schedule it." His voice cracked. "Do it now." The room buzzed with panic. Two board members exchanged glances. Someone needed to speak. Silence became the only support. Then the door swung open. Clarice stepped in. In that moment, hundreds of surveillance eyes focused on her. Jacket crisp, heels clicking softly, expression unreadable. She carried nothing but a leather satchel. An email from Marissa earlier said, "Not as the janitor. You walk in as a stakeholder." Blossom of defiance bloomed with every step. Board members gasped. Lawyers straightened. Douglas stiffened, his face a mask that began to crack. "I apologize for my tardiness," Clarice's voice carried across the room, calm and precise. "But I understand there is a leadership vote to be scheduled." A chair rattled. A board member cleared her throat. "Miss Clarice Monroe?" Clarice nodded. "Yes, I'm here as CM Rosewood." She unclipped a pin from her lapel, revealing a modest logo. Executives zoomed forward, confused anguish on their faces. Douglas's voice shook. "Why are you here? You're not on the shareholder registry." His question cut through the room. She opened her satchel. "I'm the largest individual shareholder." From her bag, she placed a stack of documents, ownership records, proxy confirmations, stock transfer logs, flat against the table. Cameras blinded the room in light. Board members leaned in. Legal counsel rifled through the sheets. Douglas stared, jaw slack. "I own 51% of Hawthorne and Mills," Clarice declared. Her suit blended authority and poise. "I authorize the immediate appointment of interim leadership under corporate bylaws. This vote takes place now." Her words landed like a gavel. The lawyer looked up. "Go ahead, Miss Rosewood." She didn't flinch. She sat near the table's center, silent but present, like justice itself. Her heartbeat hammered in her ears. It was her moment. Power was no longer abstract. She held it literally in her hands. Board members glanced at each other, confusion and realization colliding. Some whispered to privilege-managed list. Douglas turned pale and spoke in a low, brittle voice. "This is impossible." Clarice met his gaze. "Do you accept the facts, Mr. Hawthorne?" He swallowed. "I see them." His voice trembled. The monologue of power stripped from his throat. "This is a hostile takeover." Clarice tilted her head. "No, it's overdue accountability." Another long beat passed. The head lawyer finally spoke. "The bylaws, they require a vote," he said, gathering legal courage. "Ms. Rosewood, as controlling shareholder, you may cast proxies. Shall we proceed?" She glanced at the board. Several members looked like deer caught in headlights. Others shifted away. She nodded. "Yes." Her voice was an incision. "Proceed." The lawyer cleared his throat. "All in favor of appointing interim leadership selected by Ms. Rosewood, say aye." Voices blended. Aye, aye, aye. Opposed? A few hesitant murmurs, mostly Douglas's faction. Abstain? A couple of executive voices. Motion passes. The gavel hit. The room exhaled. Clarice's heart thundered. They watched her as she stood. A smile ghosted across her lips, calm, confident, unyielding. She placed a hand on the stack of documents. "Thank you." Silence exploded. Cameras flashed. Phones tapped. Douglas collapsed into his seat, head in hands. The room's grandeur dissolved behind the seismic shift. Someone began clearing away his binders, sliding Rosewood executives forward. Clarice remained poised. She had seized power, but the crisis had only begun. As the echo of the vote faded, Clarice raised a final card. She said softly, "Before we discuss next steps, I have one more document to share." She slid a sealed envelope across the table. Its label, HR Files, Systemic Bias. The board leaned forward. This was no longer just about leadership. It was about exposure. They laughed when she mopped their floors. They collapse when she owns their future. The boardroom's silence cracked like ice beneath pressure. Just minutes before, the hum of corporate certainty filled the space. Now an oppressive hush prevailed. as Clarice Monroe, standing poised and unflinching, presented tangible, verifiable evidence of her 51% ownership. The gravity was shown in every widened eye and tremor of a misplaced hand. Board members leaned forward, fumbling with documents. Legal counsel confirmed the signatures on paper. They were valid, binding, irrevocable. A junior director swallowed hard. It's real, he whispered. We have to proceed. His voice shook with fear and disbelief. Douglas Hawthorne, once the kingpin of this empire, stood motionless behind the podium where he had presided with unwavering confidence. Now his cheeks paled, sweat gathering on his upper lip. His legs wavered beneath him, as though the steel beam he stood on had cracked. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Clarice watched him, her own heart steady. This was more than a tactical victory. It was the collapse of a facade that had long insulated white power from accountability. She sensed the shift. She had ripped the blindfold from their eyes. A female board member, silver-haired and reserved, cleared her throat. Yes, the documents are legitimate. Rosewood holds the controlling stake. She glanced at Douglas, gently. Sir, unless you contest this outright. His hands trembled as he reached for a water glass. He took it, his grip tightening. Water sloshed. He gulped, swallowed, but his words caught. You can't just. He closed his eyes, voice fading. This is corporate subversion. Outside, news alerts erupted. Phones lit up. Social media blows up with a single name, Clarice Monroe. Within seconds, reporters pinged executive assistants. Stock analysts streamed commentary. Hashtags surged. Black woman CEO, janitor to owner, glass ceiling shattered. One anchor's voice echoed pre-recorded. In a shocking reversal, Hawthorne and Mill's boardroom has just been taken over. Downstairs, the trading floor lurched. Screens flashed red and green. 15% drop, 8% gain. Analysts argued whether it was a coup or undoing. Shareholders erupted in frenzy. Emails poured into investor inboxes. Phone lines hummed. The power struggle spilled into public awareness at lightning speed. Back in the room, a senior shareholder liaison entered, breathless. The markets are responding, both with excitement and panic. We're fielding calls now. He glanced at Clarice. They want reassurance we won't tank the company. Clarice's face softened. She nodded. We understand the volatility. My intention is stability, growth, but most importantly, transparency. We'll release a full oversight plan tomorrow. A ripple of surprise spread. Many expected aggressive consolidation, but not measured calm. Douglas's chest heaved. He choked out. This was planned by a cleaning woman. He spat out the words as if they burned his tongue. Faces hardened. His old supporters stiffened. Clarice stepped forward. I'm not a cleaning woman. I am a strategist, a shareholder, your controlling partner. She let each word land like stones. She glanced at him. Not your employee. At that, Douglas staggered. He clasped the podium, knuckles whitening. His breath hitched. A silence ripped into hysteria. One intern rushed to fetch medics, shouting for water. Another hit standing desks in panic, splintering polished wood. Douglas reeled, knees buckling. Medics crowded in. A chair slid beneath him as they tried to stabilize him. His face twisted in confusion and terror. No, he gasped. They lied. It's fraud. Clarice watched, her expression a mix of sorrow and solemnity. This man's unraveling wasn't gratifying. It was tragic. Yet she didn't waver. Executives began whispering across the table. One man looked at Clarice. What happens now? She turned, confident. We formalize the interim board. We stabilize the stock. We initiate the HR audit today. And we begin rebuilding culture. Another unexpected ripple cut in. Legal counsel whispered urgently to the board chair. There's movement. We have a call from the old founding family trust. They're challenging the share registry. They claim shares were illegally acquired. Panic flashed. Clarice met their eyes. She had anticipated this. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a second envelope. Regulatory filings, purchase legality. She tapped it on the table. You'll see each transaction cleared, lawful, verified. Rosewood is legitimate. The board glanced at her. A wave of relief spread. But Douglas looked up with a wild edge. Sirens wailed faintly as paramedics wheeled him away. Executives stared as he was escorted out. He reached back with a trembling hand as though to grab onto something. Anything, but no one caught him. No one stepped forward. Clarice remained silent, the calm eye in the storm's center. The door shut behind the medical team. The boardroom reeled, its heart ripped open, but now Clarice held the stitching. As medics carried Douglas away, Clarice paused over the HR audit envelope she had opened. Her assistant approached quietly, voice low. "There's something you need to see." An email thread from Douglas to a senior HR officer, dated last night, titled Handel Rosewood quietly, "Don't wake the press." Clarice's eyes narrowed. The scandal wasn't just financial, it was just beginning. What's inherited can be taken. What's earned stays eternal. The aftermath of the boardroom storm reverberated through every corridor of Hawthorne and Mills. Clarice stood at the heart of the upheaval, preparing for the next phase. This was no longer just about control. It was about confronting a legacy built on quiet prejudice and protected ambitions. The first move was transparency. Clarice cleared a space in the same boardroom where Douglas had collapsed. Now the room glowed with early evening light, an atmosphere thick with expectation. She called for clipboards and placed nameplates for all present board members, legal counsel, HR directors, signaling that everyone would bear witness. "Yesterday was a turning point," she began, her voice steady, but inside her chest, her heart thundered. "Owning 51% gives me a legal foothold, but what matters now is moral clarity." She tapped the table. "We need to audit our history, hiring policies, promotions, diversity programs, everything. We'll examine every claim of inequity, no exceptions." Gasps echoed. Several HR leaders exchanged panicked glances. A few board members clenched their jaws, gripping chairs. For the company to survive, they had to let the rot be revealed. Clarice watched the HR department's messengers arrive with thin digital folders. She quietly swapped one folder before handing it over, ensuring the original version remained untouched. She suspected resistance. She needed unfiltered data. The audit began. Over the next days, desks in every floor glowed under dozens of laptop screens. Sticky notes littered cubicles. Confidentiality seals cracked. Hiring forms, interview notes, memos, all were exposed. Clarice recruited internal allies like Marissa and forwarded secure lines to external auditors with her team. The results were devastating. A hiring policy in sales had suggested exclusions trained on keywords tied to race-coded culture fit. The marketing department routinely assigned black staff to minor client calls, while giving white team members the spotlight. A diversity and inclusion campaign, heavily publicized, had never allocated a budget for mentorship programs. Nominations were invited in name only. Several top positions had been left unfilled for months when no white candidate emerged. Roles later scrapped, then refilled with external hires. Clarice watched the numbers accumulate in charts that showed black employees received on average 35% fewer promotion interviews than white counterparts, regardless of performance. The more they revealed, the more the wounds ran deep. A senior HR director, Leslie Wilcox, finally spoke during a meeting. Her voice trembled. We thought we were doing the right thing. We quoted diversity reports. We posted the numbers online. But we never asked ourselves if we meant it." Clarice responded softly. "Posting numbers isn't progress. Owning gaps and changing tactics is." HR heads nodded, guilty but silent. Anonymized interviews poured in. Rashad Thompson reappeared in footage, his name removed from an award ceremony after he'd led a critical AI module. Marta Jenkins confirmed being told she was too aggressive during performance evaluation meetings. Jalen Moore explained how his AI prototype had been handed to a white executive before launch. Their voices weren't loud. They were cautious, emotionally layered, stunned by the truth finally being named. Many taped behind closed doors. "I was always told I was too soft-spoken for leadership. I gave metrics-driven presentations, and they said I didn't fit the energy." Anonymous female engineer, recorded for audit. Clarice knew these stories held weight. She used them sparingly in the audit, carefully. One evening, Clarice found a message on her secure device. "You're missing the CEO's old charity files. Be careful what you expose." It was unsigned, but the implication was clear. Douglas's family trust had begun pulling back inquiries. Threats of lawsuits loomed. She consulted legal counsel. They cautioned about defamation suits, but Clarice remained resolute. Truth is defense. She asked them to prepare for potential lawsuits while the audit continued. Within 48 hours, the summary audit hit the press. Clarice had released a toned-down version, but the core was explosive. Confirmed systemic bias, false optics of inclusivity, evidence of internal discrimination that ran deeper than anyone expected. News cycles exploded. Hashtags like audit the bias, un the truth, Rosewood reform began viral trends. Black-owned media praised her. Conservative outlets warned of corporate cancel culture. Some investors celebrated the overhaul. Internal confidence shifted. Employees began to believe accountability might come at last. Employees waited at their desks for updates. Allies met in corners, offering thanks. Black staff, long feeling invisible, sent Clarice messages. One read, I've never felt more seen. Thank you. It was a moment of validation. But the storm was far from over. That evening, as Clarice reviewed reports, Marissa rushed in. Her face was pale. They found something, she said, voice shaking. What? Clarice demanded. Marissa held out her phone, playing a grainy audio file. It was 20 seconds of Douglas's voice praising the tokenization of black hires, mocking them as decorative furniture for PR photos. The board's cleaning up was framing it as off-the-record banter, but the tape was evidence, and the employee's voice at the end whispered, "If this gets out, it all falls." Clarice pressed play again. Douglas's laugh echoed through her phone, followed by a soft, defiant whisper. "Rosewood is next." She stared at Marissa. "We have the tape, and he knows it. The question is, who leaked it? And are we ready for the aftermath?" Truth always finds a voice, even when it's silenced. Night had draped itself over the city when Clarice pressed play on her phone. The hiss of static preceded Douglas Hawthorne's unmistakable voice, casual and unguarded as if captured in the privacy of his own retreat. "They want a billboard, some black faces to slap on brochures. Decorative. Warm up the press release. But real decisions. That'll stay white." The implication hit like a hammer. Those were his exact words. Stripped of nuance. Ridiculous in their frankness. Ruthless in intent. Every syllable twisted the gut. This was no isolated insult. It was institutional disdain. As she listened, a second voice surfaced. Another executive, subtler, more refined, laughed. "Exactly, Doug. We needed eyes, not minds." Clarice nearly dropped her phone. Someone else belonged to the conspiracy. A monitor glowed late at night in the PR department. A junior specialist named Irene Chen stared at the waveform of the tape, her mind racing. She'd found the file buried in an HR folder, misplaced, intentionally marked "Don't Delete," and had contacted Clarice discreetly. Employees were filing weekend resignations by morning if something didn't happen. "That was brutal," Irene whispered over a secure call. Clarice exhaled. "It's not just brutal. It's binding. We'll use it. But we must act smart." Irene nodded, visible resolve in the dim glow. "People are ready. They're outside, hundreds already." Clarice's breath caught. "Okay. We're launching at 8 a.m. The next morning, the world woke to shock. Newsroom tickers, social media alerts, online feeds, each flashed the same headline. Top CEO caught on tape. Black executives, decorative furniture. Video snippets accompanied the leaks. Investors' fingers trembled over sell buttons. Activists shared screenshots. The leak came from multiple sources simultaneously, an orchestrated PR assault. Board members, including those who had quietly supported her, felt the temperature spike in the building. The lobby flooded with employees chanting, holding signs, "We deserve respect. Diversity, not deception." Their voices echoed through sweeping atriums and empty boardroom windows. Clarice exited the boardroom just in time to see the first protesters gather. Their hopes and anger were visible in fierce eyes. Security hesitated. Cameras buzzed. It was no longer about a takeover. It was about justice. Public relations lit up like a house on fire. At the press room podium, Irene stood with Reed Thompson, the newly appointed interim spokesperson. They faced a wall of media cameras clicking, recorders spinning. "Irene Chen, today we acknowledge something long ignored. This tape isn't just proof. It's the result of a culture designed to silence. Reed Thompson, effective immediately. Executive reviews will be conducted. Full transparency. We apologize profusely." The admission rocked the corporate world. Markets responded with volatility. Some investors dumped shares. Others praised radical transparency. Comments poured in. Finally, someone said it. "This exposes corporate favoritism." When will white-led companies learn? Clarice watched from behind the scenes, her heart pounding with both pride and weight. They had expected good PR, but not this uproar. Employee reactions varied, but boiled down to two themes: validation and demand. Inside the building, employees flooded executive offices, not threatening, but firm. Boards of mid-level managers were plastered with demands. Resign now. Monthly diversity reports. Independent HR oversight. Meetings were canceled. Cafeteria lines stretched as colleagues discussed next steps. A group of engineers, including Marissa, stood quietly in the lobby. Marissa said, "It's surreal seeing them react now. We've lived this for years." Clarice nodded. "Now they'll have to feel it." Just as Clarice thought she'd heard it all, a second tape emerged. This one from a staff meeting held months earlier. Douglas was leading an offsite, consoling board members about diversity numbers falling short. "Douglas, our metrics are bad, not for the product but for optics. Get Megan in compliance to backdate hires." His voice sounded numb. I don't care how. Just make it appear. The op-ed erupted instantly. Falsified diversity, corporate lies, legal experts rushed in. Regulators eyed the company. Shareholder lawsuits were filed. The building's glass facade seemed to shudder. Clarice felt her vision evolve. This was no longer a reclamation. It was a reckoning. Back in the boardroom, the board chair struggled to maintain order. One member stood, pale-faced. Our reputation. Our legitimacy. Clarice interrupted gently but firmly. Your legitimacy died when prejudice was covered up. We're rebuilding on truth. The room shifted. Some nodded. Others looked away in shame. This was leadership in crisis, but also rebirth. Just then, a legal counsel burst in. We just received word. Douglas Hawthorne has been admitted, voluntarily, for psychiatric evaluation. He cited stress and vision impairment. Silenced whispers followed. The once omnipotent CEO had collapsed under his own making. Clarice stood at the threshold, her eyes on the empty podium and the eyes of those present. The building's future balanced on the edge of a blade. Who would step up to redefine everything? Markets, regulators, employees. They all waited now. As the boardroom emptied to handle the crisis, Clarice approached the taped transcript on the central screen. A final line scrawled at the bottom caught her eye. Rosewood will fail too. Someone believed her takeover wasn't secure. But who, and were they inside the tower, watching her every move? From ash and injustice rises a power unbreakable. The morning sunlight streamed through Hawthorne and Mill's glass facade as employees filed into the cavernous town hall. Chairs were arranged in precise rows, but the atmosphere crackled with emotion, anticipation, suspicion, hope. In every face, fatigue from the scandal was tempered by curiosity. After years of silencing, finally someone was speaking. At the center stage, Clarice Monroe stood alone behind a plain wooden podium. Gone was the tailored suit's armor. She wore a simple white blouse and black slacks, a deliberate choice to show solidarity, not superiority. The room fell silent. Even the automatic lighting seemed to dim in preparation. She took a breath and began not with corporate jargon, but with honesty. I stand before you today, not as your CEO, but as someone who was once invisible. You saw me as a janitor. You saw me as background noise. My presence here is proof that your voices matter. The audience shifted. A low hum of recognition passed through the crowd. Clarice closed her eyes briefly, recalling her father's dignified silence when he was dismissed. Today she wanted to rewrite that narrative. Clarice recounted her journey honestly, third person infused with emotion. There were moments I questioned myself, times I wanted to shrink so others could breathe easier. At Stanford, I was top of my class, but they saw only the color of my skin. I'd been told I was articulate, too demanding, culture fit was a stretch, but each label fueled me. I carried every dismissal like a piece of armor. And when I joined this company as a janitor, I wasn't defeated. I was gathering what I needed to hold power responsible. Her voice caught on, this company as a janitor. But she pressed on. She detailed the covert stock purchases, the strategy behind her takeover, and the moral purpose lurking behind each financial move. The room's temperature shifted. Some nodded in tears, others in stunned silence. A ripple of respect washed over the audience. This wasn't a presentation. It was a confession and a revolution. Just when the tone seemed poised on corporate redemption, Clarice paused. I assumed people would care about data. What I didn't anticipate was how lonely this would be. She paused, letting vulnerability speak louder than any statistics. I've lost mentors, allies. I've been told I was lucky rather than talented. And tonight, I need you all to walk this path with me. In that moment, some employees wept quietly. It wasn't manipulative. It was human. Clarice pulled out a second set of documents, an accessible version of an equity-sharing proposal. Flat across the front were words, earned ownership, shared legacy. And on stage she spoke it plainly. This is not just a transaction, it's transformation. Effective today, we are initiating a new ownership model. Full-time employees, regardless of role, will be eligible for stock options after 1 year. 5% of my personal holdings, shares I own as Rosewood, will be allocated to our historically overlooked workers. Murmurs rippled through the audience, disbelief blending with elation. A few people sat up straighter. A junior technician mouthed, "Really?" Clarice smiled. "Yes, really. No more decorative appointments. No more token gestures. Ownership is belonging." Marissa Yates, seated in the front row, wiped tears from her eyes. The office manager next to her placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. Something fundamental had shifted. Clarice called for the future leadership squad. One by one, she invited Marissa, Jalen, Irene and non-board advisors into the spotlight. Each walked up, visibly proud, and took their place beside her. She announced their roles. Marissa Yates, Head of Employee Relations and Diversity Integrity. Jalen Moore, Director of Innovation and AI Strategy. Irene Chen, Chief Communications Officer. Reed Thompson, CFO of Cultural Capital and Outreach. The crowd erupted in applause. Standing ovation shook the hall. Employees who had felt voiceless minutes earlier now saw peers in control, a radical rebirth of corporate structure. A voice from the back called out, "Will it stick?" It was quiet, but carried emotional weight. Clarice leaned forward.
It will, because it's built on truth, accountability, and ownership by those who give this company its pulse. We will audit, report, and adjust annually. We will listen. We will act, not with optics, but with ownership.
She paused once more. If I fail, you can vote me out with your shares. But we'll try together. The weight of her promise hung in the room. It wasn't bravado. It was real and inclusive. As applause died down, almost silently, someone texted a rumor into the Slackwork channel. Someone uploaded training modules from 2018. They matched the tape's tone. Employees gasped. Another push notification. Former interns logged in. They found falsified trainer scripts from leadership seminars. The town hall had shifted from stage to global network. People began checking their phones. Clarice turned her attention to a live feed. Employees around the world were streaming the talk. Comments flooded in. Praise, critique, love. The promise was spreading beyond the building walls. Clarice closed the session with heartfelt resolve. We're not perfect, but we're prepared. We will carry this promise forward. We're the owners now. Ownership isn't inherited, it's earned, and we earned it together. The standing ovation lasted for minutes. People rose not for a woman. They rose for their new company, their redefined future. Back in her office, as Clarice packed away her notes, her assistant slipped a white envelope across the desk. No name, no indication. She opened it. Inside was one line typed on crisp cardstock. Your first steps were courageous. Now who watches the phoenix? At the bottom, the simple signature. A friend. She paused. The journey had soared, but someone remained in the shadows, watching. Not all enemies collapse. Some reload in the dark. By sunrise, the building buzz had quieted, but Clarice could feel the tension in the undercurrent. The world had seen the town hall, the equity-sharing model, and the brand-new leadership slate. The phoenix had risen, but power shifted, had many aftershocks yet to come. She stepped into her office, large, sunlit, barely an hour since the town hall ended. She opened her briefcase to find a crisp white envelope placed on her notes without explanation. No signature, just the elegant looping handwriting. Step down, Clarice Monroe. Walk away now, or watch everything crumble around you. We know your secrets. There was no context, no return address, just an ominous warning. Clarice's pulse spiked, eyes narrowing. The threat was personal. No corporate jargon, no mention of Rosewood. They were issuing a direct challenge. She sat and reread it, her mind racing. Were they targeting her as a person, or as the face of Rosewood's vision? She scanned the room, suddenly aware of every camera, every possible entry point. Someone had infiltrated her sanctuary. She called Marissa and Reed into her office swiftly. Clarice quiet but firm. This arrived an hour ago. No envelope seal broken, no fingerprints, just the message. Marissa, it could be Douglas's allies or the family trust. They lost power, and this is their first move. Reed, we'll need to tighten your security, digital footprint, physical access. We cover it, but we must investigate who sent it. Clarice nodded. Start with CCTV from yesterday afternoon. Check building access logs and mailroom activity. Go encrypted, use secure lines. I want to know every person who could have placed this. Hours later, Reed returns with unsettling news. Read, Clarice, it's not just internal. The letter mentions we know your secrets. The writer listed two, something that only you and Marissa discussed in private yesterday. Clarice stiffened. They were watching us. Marissa shook her head. It's closer than we thought. A hush fell on the trio. It wasn't just a broad threat. It was targeted, informed. Whoever wrote that letter belonged to their inner circle or had one foot inside. Clarice paced the window ledge, looking down on the silent plaza below. Her hands clutched the letter. They weren't in the windowless darkness anymore. They were illuminated, and someone loathed that. She responded to the team quietly. We're moving to full surveillance, bodyguards for me after hours, log all access, and no one changes anything without 3 eyes on it. Marissa led the internal review of cameras. They retraced Clarice's precise steps, leaving the town hall, walking through multiple corridors to her office. Cameras on each floor were cross-referenced, but around her office landing, there was a blind zone, an outdated security feed. "Who hasn't updated that camera in years?" Marissa asked. "That feeds into the old HR annex," Reed answered. "Constructed decades ago, no binding to modern upgrades." Clarice dubbed it the Shadow Corridor. She assigned Reed to auction-level digital forensics, list of recent contractors, maintenance staff, anyone given physical clearance to that area in the past 2 weeks. That evening, Clarice reviewed the contractor list. She noticed one name flashing in her memory. Douglas Appleton, a consultant for CCTV upgrades hired 3 weeks ago. He'd been let go immediately after town hall. But why was a fresh exit blameworthy for mail access? She confronted Reed the next morning. He was in the last maintenance team. Only he and 2 aides had her clearance, and HR said he resigned suddenly. Reed frowned. "Clarice, I've looked." Appleton wiped his work phone, deleted call logs. HR routing shows his last day aligned with the envelope's appearance. That meant he'd been in her office after hours, just before the letter arrived, and then disappeared from digital trace. Silence met her. Clarice sank back. She'd conquered Apex, but now the mountain trembled under her feet. An insider had listened, watched, learned, and threatened. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't since the coffee humiliation. Only this time, it wasn't a CEO's small cruelty. It was a deep breach in her fortress. By midday, Clarice's team had a multi-layer security plan. Round-the-clock physical security for Clarice's office and home. Full retention of CCTV and badge logs. Encrypted communication for all leadership. Temporary revocation of non-essential access in the annex corridors. Background check on all pending contractors. An emergency audit of former ones. Clarice signed off, voice firm. "We prepare for more. I'm not stepping down, but no gap is unguarded." Late that night, Marissa reopened the shadow corridor footage. She clicked through each camera timestamp from last night. A shadow emerged, an unrecognizable figure placing an envelope under Clarice's door. But the timestamp flipped, 3:07 a.m., the same time Clarice had been on a call with Irene, logged remotely from home. She hadn't left until 3:15. Marissa's whisper crackled through encrypted chat. "Clarice, you weren't in the office when this happened. Who else could be?" Clarice's breath caught. Someone inside her team had that access. That meant deception had seeped into her closest circle. Clarice sat at her desk, letter in hand. She knew the fight had become personal, no longer just structural. Someone had betrayed trust. They had physical access, and they knew the vulnerabilities Marissa and Reed had exposed. She tapped the group chat, "Find Appleton, check any connection to our team, and run polygraphs on team with annex access." At that moment, her door buzzed. She pressed the intercom. "Security, ma'am, your assistant says someone is here to see you." Clarice frowned. On video. The screen flashed. A tall man, formally dressed, waiting outside. Hands folded, eyes direct. No one recognized him. Marissa's final message glowed on Clarice's phone. "That's not Appleton. Someone used his partial badge, but the Face ID mismatch means someone is spoofing. Be careful." The door clicked unlock. He stepped in, calm and composed. "Miss Monroe," he said, voice measured. "You don't know me, but I know everything, and I've come to help. When fear doesn't work, they plot, but so does she." Even as the mysterious visitor stepped into her office, Clarice felt something shift beneath her feet. She recognized the danger. This was no ally. It was a harbinger. Yet she'd been here before, the board coup rumbling under layers of privilege and paranoia. The stranger closed the door and met Clarice's gaze. "Ms. Monroe," he began, voice calm but taut. "I'm Agent Collins. Corporate integrity. The FBI is monitoring suspected coup activity against your leadership. I'm here to offer protection and assistance." Clarice's breath stilled. She expected shadow players coordinating through back channels, but not federal agents. Her voice was steady, but beneath it, steel forged from sleepless nights. "You have evidence?" He nodded and placed a tablet on her desk. It displayed emails between board members and family trust lawyers coordinating to oust her. Terms included temporary suspension, appointment of neutral trustee, and contingent on stock reallocation. A traditional coup actor, fear, backroom votes, and blackmail. Clarice felt her resolve crystallize. She'd known whispers, but this was laid bare. One email stood out. It wasn't just board members. It included a financier she'd thought supportive. Marissa's former mentor, Jonathan Reese, urging them to act fast. He'd fearfully circulated the plan to safeguard legacy returns. It hurt. Trust had decayed inside her ranks. The board met again under duress. Financial advisors, lawyers, and now federal oversight. Cameras rolled. The meeting was streamed live, not leaked, but broadcasted by Clarice's design. She had sent out secure links to every employee and investor minutes before it began. As the board prepared to vote on her removal, she walked in, clad in black, her posture immaculate. She stepped toward the podium. The room snapped to attention. "Before you cast a single vote," she said quietly, "let's review why we're here." She connected the tablet and pressed play. Emails scrolled across the screen. Her voice punctuated each betrayal. "You didn't vote on culture. You bet on fear. You tried to steal progress." Board members' faces paled. Jonathan sat frozen. Others shifted. She didn't pause. She offered them a choice: confess and face publicly documented removal, or resign on their own terms, in writing, within 24 hours. The broadcasts were live. No room for hush deals. One by one, human resources officers stepped forward. Each board member had their resignation letter read aloud. Their names were listed, not as traitors, but as architects of regression. Then they were removed from the board registry, live. Their faces showed shock, panic, shame. Clarice kept her tone professional. She closed the session. "This isn't revenge, it's accountability. If you believed our equity-sharing model would fail, your fear isn't reason, it's choice." Within hours, the streaming URLs flooded investor apps. Analysts suggested the decisive transparency calmed markets. Employees buzzed with pride. Internal surveys showed a 40% surge in morale. Clarice posted a follow-up message. "Today was not about firing. It was about standing by principle. We move forward together." Communications flowed. Departments held celebratory, but mindful meetings. Mentors were reinstated. Community leaders lobbied for further inclusion steps. For the first time, culture wasn't a slogan. It was a lived reality. Late at night, as Clarice reviewed the streamed views and comments, she noticed several flagged messages, congratulatory texts from Jonathan Reese, but their IP traced inside the building, his terminal, after hours. As she stared at the record, realization hit. Reese didn't resign early, he stayed. He'd tried to hide by prerogative of digital presence. Someone had edited the feed to show his resignation, but he remained in proximity and access. Her stomach turned. The problem wasn't over. The next morning, the lobby was alive. Interns high-fived. Engineers sparked ideas on whiteboards. Cleaning staff smiled at each other. Yes, she'd remembered them. Shared ownership meant equity. Equity meant visibility. Visibility meant dignity. Clarice materialized in the center of it all, wearing a company-branded polo she'd helped create. Someone called out, "Thank you, CEO." She smiled genuinely and said, "We're building it together." She paused, looking around. This was her legacy. As she stepped into her office, a plain envelope waited on her desk. Inside was a White House embossed invitation. "Please join us at the White House for a roundtable on corporate racial equity. One slot reserved, Clarice Monroe." Her eyes widened. Today she had beaten back a coup. Tomorrow she'd speak at the highest level. But what would she find when she looked beyond the tower's walls? One voice, once ignored, now echoes through the highest halls. The White House briefing room fell silent as Clarice Monroe approached the podium. Sunlight filtered across the backdrop of the American flag, illuminating her determined face. Winding carpets and polished floors were worlds away from the echoing boardrooms she once served. Now, this was the stage, a bridge from the margins to the center of national dialogue. She began, voice steady and clear. "Good afternoon. My name is Clarice Monroe. I speak to you today not only as the CEO of Hawthorne & Mills, now Monroe Equity, but as someone who once scrubbed the floors of that very building. A black woman who learned early that no dream is beyond reach, even in the face of systemic barriers." Her words hit like thunder in a quiet storm, capturing decades of unheard stories. Clarice shared specific insights: the institutional debts owed by corporate America to employees of color, the hidden costs of colorblind hiring, and the human toll of tokenism. When we treat diversity as decoration, we camouflage injustice. When we build companies behind blinkers, we build walls. Walls that keep talent from attaining power and profit from equating to privilege. She referenced her own corporate transformation, not as a spectacle, but as proof. "My takeover wasn't a vanity move. It was a statement. Equity isn't charity. Ownership is justice." Each sentence drew nods, pen scratches, and probing glances from national reporters. As broadcast cameras rolled, Clarice paused. She looked down, then addressed a single student seated front row. A young black woman holding a notepad. "I want to hear from you." The student hesitated, voice wavering. "In my school they teach us history, but not how people like you shifted power from within. Clarice touched her arm. Then let me be part of the history you learn. It's unfinished, so you can write the next chapter. Murmurs of affirmation rippled through the room. Within minutes of her address, social media exploded. Clips of her speech, especially that student interaction, went viral. Phoenix at the White House trended. Interviews followed, late-night shows, major networks, morning news segments. Educators took note curricula were being rewritten. One superintendent tweeted, "Clarice Monroe's story will be taught in 10th grade civics starting next semester. A blueprint for systemic change." Black entrepreneurship groups hailed her message as a milestone in generational justice. Wall Street analysts were forced to reassess internal diversity plans. Boardrooms across America were counting the cost of ignoring her. Unexpectedly, lawmakers from both parties responded. A senior senator, normally cautious with corporate activism, called for bipartisan hearings. He tweeted, "Clarice Monroe shows us that change begins in boardrooms. It must also echo in Congress." A newly proposed bill, tentatively called the Corporate Equity Act, gained momentum. Mandatory reporting on diversity hires, executive ownership stakes reservation for marginalized employees, transparent audit disclosures. Clarice's speech became its heartbeat. She spent the next days in studios, balancing interviews and policy roundtables. Every conversation reiterated her message. Systemic racism wasn't just a moral failing, it was an economic one. Back in the city, classrooms displayed her quotes on walls. Teachers organized debates on corporate ethics. Students dissected her speech for rhetorical power. A new generation studied her trajectory, from janitor to CEO to national voice, as evidence that perseverance and accountability could disrupt entrenched systems. As momentum grew, so did unexpected letters and digital messages. Allies from across the nation, former employees, even competitors, offered support. One senior exec from a rival firm sent a handwritten note. "Your courage reminded me of my father's fight in labor rights. I offer our firm's full cooperation." Clarice curated these messages privately, seeing them as testaments to the ripple her actions created. Late one night, after her final televised interview, Clarice sat alone in her private study. The White House address transcripts lay open on her desk. She reviewed strategy notes for the upcoming Senate hearing, drafts of testimonies, partnerships, policy frameworks. A message pinged on her encrypted phone. No sender name, just a phone number. Intrigued, she opened it. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Jonah Kingston. I believe we share a father. I'm your brother. I want to meet." The message ended without a trace, no replies prior, no shared memories. Clarice stared at the text, her breath caught. The nation was listening, but now a voice from her own past wanted her attention. She placed the phone on the desk, thumb hovering over the reply button. Outside, the city skyline glowed. Inside, her heart awaited the next truth. Some wounds are buried beneath success, waiting to surface. Clarice stared at the message from Jonah Kingston. "I'm your brother," and felt her world shift. Despite the grandeur of the White House moment, her past was knocking harder than ever. She responded quietly, "Tell me everything." Within hours, Jonah appeared at the company's volunteer counseling center, a modest annex converted from a former conference room. He was lean, his face lined with years of hardship. His eyes held grief, resignation, and an unspoken hope. Clarice met him halfway down the aisle. Their embrace, hesitant at first, rippled into something fierce, raw, and disbelieving. Over strong coffee, Jonah began his story as if unspooling his life from a frayed reel. "I was 2 when she left," he said, voice careful. "I grew up not knowing who my mother was. Dad worked 2 jobs, barely home. I got into trouble, drugs, petty crime. They locked me up at 19. He swallowed. I got 8 years. When I got out, no jobs, no help." His hands trembled subtly. "I was broken." Clarice listened, each word a shard of guilt and sorrow. Her success had come at his loss. They were both children of a system that ignored their value, her by color, him by circumstance. Jonah revealed that their father, in his final years, had given his life savings to Jonah for college and recovery. But it vanished, embezzled by a distant uncle. Clarice's heart clenched in disbelief. The very man who'd shielded family from poverty had been betrayed. Jonah's voice cracked. "Dad died waiting for me to build it back. I felt I failed him." Tears surfaced. Clarice reached across the table, gripping his hand. The silence they shared was vulnerable, and it spoke more than any words. They walked into Clarice's office, her world of policy and purpose. Yet this moment required neither speech nor applause. Jonah paused at the threshold, then turned. "I'm proud of you." But his voice faltered. "I'm scared you'll see me as a weakness." Clarice shook her head firmly. You're my brother. If strength were measured in fortunes, neither of us would know it. They sat facing an expansive skyline. She told him everything. Her father's firing, her vows, her takeover. Jonah nodded slowly, absorbing revelations of a sister he never knew. They were both forged in system neglect. He cracked a gentle smile upon learning she'd built a foundation to help people like him. In the heart of her boardroom studio, Clarice introduced Jonah to her leadership team. Marissa, Jalen, Irene. With subtle ceremony, she presented a proposal. I'm allocating $1 million from Monroe Equity to launch the Kingston Foundation, in Dad's name. She continued, it will fund mentoring, scholarships, job training, and reintegration support for formerly incarcerated Black youth. Jonah's eyes watered. You'll do this for me? She smiled, clearing chips of hurt in her own throat. For us. For generations. Jalen revealed he'd secured 10 paid internships this summer for foundation beneficiaries, roles inside the firm's emerging AI and marketing departments. Additionally, the executive team's private donors would match the fund. Tension rose as Marissa presented curriculum partnerships with nonprofits that offered legal advice and mental health services. Irene confirmed communications channels were already active, students signing up. The foundation's scope was ambitious, but so was its purpose: to break cycles of systemic neglect. Weeks passed, and the company's hallways transformed. Interns, young men and women with resumes battered by past labels, walked confidently. They brought ideas, brilliance, and gratitude. From an early meeting, I designed a mobile app to connect returning citizens with employers, said one intern. Clarice paused, heart swelling. She leveled her gaze at him. Build it, we'll fund it. Employees watched Jonah alongside interns, offering mentorship. He shared his story openly. I was here. Now I'm walking out of here. His presence pulled compassion into action, bridging boardroom power and lived experience. One evening, Clarice found Jonah working late in the volunteer center. He was drafting a newsletter, explaining the foundation's mission. Clarice sat beside him. Jonah, I never thought I'd be part of something like this. Clarice, you earned every piece. He paused, raising his pen thoughtfully. I want to meet other kids face to face. Show them we matter. No words more powerful than that. Unnoticed, a local journalist attended an intern orientation day. She wrote a feature, From Prison to Purpose. It hit regional headlines. The foundation's impact rippled outward. Donations surged. Other corporations called to learn how to emulate the model. Clarice's vision was expanding beyond her building, and beyond mere policy. It was becoming movement. The following morning, Clarice arrived at the office and found a thin envelope on her desk. No stamp, no return name. Inside lay a brief handwritten note. Dear Clarice, for too long I mistook inheritance for insight. I caused pain, and for that I am truly sorry. I'm working on doing better. Douglas Hawthorne. No apology seems enough. But her gaze focused not on the paper, but on the penmanship. It was shaky, heartfelt. Clarice closed her eyes. They'd both been broken by privilege and silence, and now the author of her oppression was reaching out. But was it genuine? Could a man born into old guards evolve? And if he could, was she ready to forgive? The foundation halls hummed with the energy of new beginnings, but a single note from rehab had reopened old wounds. Clarice folded the letter gently and looked up at Jonah, whose expression bore both curiosity and caution. What now? She asked herself, and the journey beyond justice began. From floor sweeper to empire builder, not in spite of her skin but because of it. Clutching the edges of the grand boardroom table, one final time, Clarice Monroe watched as the mahogany letters were gently peeled off the wall. Hawthorne and Mills Enterprises. Each letter's removal echoed her journey, dismantling legacy to build something stronger. The last Mills fell. In its place, under her instructions, a fresh sign was mounted, Monroe Equity. The repainted facade outside gleamed in the morning light, a symbol of transformation beyond cosmetic rebranding. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with renewal. Every plaque, memorandum, and mission statement reflected shared ownership, diverse leadership, and genuine inclusion. The company's evolution was complete, but so was Clarice's original promise. Standing before the newly installed sign, she recalled her father at the factory exit, head bowed but unbroken. She could hear his voice. Don't apologize for being you. Build something they can't ignore. In that moment, Monroe Equity wasn't just a name. It was a monument to that lesson. The quarterly earnings report read like a triumph. Revenues had doubled year over year since her takeover. Investor confidence restored. Share value climbed steadily. Market analysts celebrated, Monroe Equity is proving that social transformation and profitability are not mutually exclusive. Inside, employee surveys hit record highs. Inclusion indexes soared. Industry magazines praised initiatives from their internship programs, wellness support, and transparent governance. The annual Fortune 500 list featured them under most ethical and inclusive workplaces. Trade publications highlighted their decentralized leadership structures and human-centric AI ethics board. Clarice stood in interviews and said, "We prove every day that the old narrative, women, people of color, can lead with both compassion and competence, wasn't wrong. It was just untested." Walking the halls now, there was a new rhythm. Behind every office door, teams brainstormed with confidence. The cafeteria buzzed with collaboration, not hierarchy. Maintenance staff volunteered on strategy panels. Interns programmed alongside executives. Every voice had weight. In the innovation lab, Jalen Moore stood beside a White House intern, analyzing usage of an app connecting formerly incarcerated youth to job markets. Marissa Yates oversaw listening circles on employee feedback. Security, once seen as enforcing distance, now guided safety and wellness meetings. The culture was empathetic and energized, fine-tuned by trauma, accountability, and purpose. Alone in her expansive corner office, now simplified, no luxury, only functional elegance, Clarice reflected. She thought of the coffee in the lobby, hot and humiliating. The janitor's uniform still hung in her locker as a memorial. She thought of Rashad, Marta, Jalen, Marissa, Irene. Each connection joined her across time and pain. She recalled every small betrayal, the hiring fakes, no-show board meetings, resignation emails, threatening letters, and knew they were all chapters in the story of institutional racism made personal. But through strategy and spirit, she'd made each chapter a lesson for what came next. She opened a journal and wrote, "This victory isn't a private triumph. It belongs to every person who was meant to be invisible and made visible. I stand on their shoulders." As she returned her journal to the drawer, a forgotten envelope slipped out, one she hadn't yet opened. Embossed with a factory seal, inside was a small note from Arcadia Foundry, the factory that had fired her father all those years ago. "We've checked our records. Your father's position is being honored. We would like to formally apologize. The building at 14th Avenue, soon to be closed, is now offered for purchase." Her breath caught. Her first victory, her father's humiliation, now came full circle with this unexpected gesture. Clarice scheduled a meeting with the foundation team and shared the revelation. Together they planned not just to buy the old factory building, but to transform it into a community innovation center. It would be the Templeton Center, named for her father, a space for vocational training, mentorship, community development, and the arts. Marissa, Jalen, and Jonah rallied around the idea. Irene mobilized communications. The board approved unanimously. This wasn't just corporate, it was covenant. At the unveiling ceremony on site with the factory gates open, Clarice addressed the crowd. "My father told me, don't apologize for being you. Build something they can't ignore. Today we build on his name, his dignity, and his unbroken spirit." She posted the quote on the reclaimed factory wall, alongside black and white photos of her father at work, helmet on, pride on his face. Tears rippled through the audience of former factory workers, community members, interns, and employees. She paused. "This building will be more than bricks," she said. "It will teach us all why work matters, who matters, and how dignity is earned." Clarice stepped aside, scanning the crowd. Across the courtyard, she spotted a familiar figure, Douglas Hawthorne, visiting the site in person, supported by a walker and escorted by someone from rehab. His eyes met hers, silent but full of unspoken questions. In that moment she knew. The next chapter wasn't just about buildings or profit. It was about forgiveness, accountability, and whether old wounds could become bridges. If this story moved you, if Clarice's journey reminded you of the power of resilience, justice, and reclaiming what was once denied, then help us keep these voices alive. Like this video if you believe in equity. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but transform. Together we're not just telling stories. We're rewriting the narrative. Let's build something they can't ignore.